Welcome to the T4TCS podcast and YouTube channel. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and provide your feedback in terms of ideas and topics that you believe are related to T4TCS. We would like to take the time to let our viewers and listeners know that the information discussed here is not to be interpreted as a clinical approach to trauma and psychology. T4TCS was designed to provide insightful information on topics related to post-traumatic growth, finding solutions to somatic healing through a mind and body connection that works for you. It also serves as a platform for members from various communities to learn about positive effects of a trauma-informed approach to self-defense and martial arts training. And now, take the time to enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 4 of the T4TCS podcast. As we promised and had mentioned, we have a special guest here. His name is Legault. He's one of the people that had honored me in inviting me over to Durham College to speak not just once but twice to his postgraduate students in the mental health and addictions program. So thanks for joining us today. I'm just going to kind of introduce the subject matter of the episode today. So what we're talking about today, we're still dealing talking about the martial arts side of things and the really good aspects of it when it comes to dealing with post-traumatic stress, somatic energy release, and post-traumatic growth. But what we wanted to do is have Carl here, and he accepted, he accepted to be on the show to talk about the pros and cons, the benefits of using multiple different types of supports to help people grow from trauma and do it in a positive way, but also highlight sometimes that there's a need for medication that's involved in the immediate aftermath of trauma. If anybody's read some of the stuff that we talked about or that I've written, trauma in the broader sense of the term, if we think about it, it's a Greek word for wound. And when we think about addressing a wound or in first aid, we're looking at providing immediate care to minimize harm, right? So, but it doesn't mean that we're going to continue with the same kind of care that we did at the beginning of our response to that specific event, right? It's not sustainable, and it's actually not healthy for us. Kind of like when, a toenail gets ripped off, you want to have it exposed after a little bit so that it heals properly, right? So you provide immediate care to a wound, and over time you need to expose it and then reapply the first aid and then continue that exposure until that healing is done. And that's pretty much how traumatic or post-traumatic growth in a reasonable way can effectively work if we apply the same strategies to it. But somatic experiencing isn't the only option, and sometimes just using that option could be more harmful, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Also using a salutogenic approach to it as opposed to a pathogenic approach where we're trying to look at the reason for the traumatic event or the traumatic injury and diagnosing and treating the signs and the symptoms. We want to look at a way to grow from it and move ahead. So that's where Carl's expertise is going to come into play. I've only dipped my toes in the post-traumatic growth specialist realm. Yes, certified, but this is where Carl comes in, and this is where he can provide a ton of insight. So Carl, I've spoken enough right now, so if you just want to give us an introduction into who you are, talk about to the viewers and to the listeners and let us know who you are, and then we can get moving with the discussion.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot for having me, by the way.
You're welcome.
It's great to be here. So I'm Carl. I am, well, I have two roles really professionally. One is I teach at a college, Durham College in Oshawa, mainly in the addictions and mental health program.
Yep.
I also teach in like related programs. There's one called Community Mental Health. There's a social service worker program. They all kind of like they overlap. There's a lot of like cross-pollination in those programs. I'm the program coordinator in the addictions and mental health program, and the main courses that I teach, or what I do in that program, is I prepare people to be frontline workers in a mental health setting or in an addictions support setting, like working in a detox or, you know, like in a rehab center, that kind of thing. And then my kind of side gig, I guess, I still spend like 15 to 20 hours a week doing this, is I'm a registered psychotherapist. And I specialize in trauma treatment, especially from an addictions-based perspective, right? So folks, I mean, you probably talked about this yourself at some point. There's this really scary, heavy connection between addiction and trauma, especially the experience of trauma early in someone's life that becomes unresolved, and then addiction kind of emerges later on, unsurprisingly, as someone's attempt to kind of solve the problems of their post-traumatic stress, right? Like, and whatever symptoms of like flashbacks or avoidance behaviors, addiction kind of comes in as a way of dealing with that. It works well in the short term, but it's rough in the long term. So that's what I specialize in my therapy practice. I also treat like mood disorders as well, and I help people more generally with what we call personal growth goals, like, you know, people who kind of come into counseling not because something's wrong, but because they want to get a bit better. So they want to level up some part of their life, right?
Right.
Yeah, so that's where I come from. And I guess I'm also a dad. I've got two girls.
That's right.
And I mean, the reason I mention that too is not just because I want to plug my own family, but one thing I tell my students is I'm teaching you right now, right? Because I'm imagining that one day, I've got a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. I'm imagining that one of my daughters, who knows, you know, like heaven forbid, you know, something happened to one of them, right, that they experience a mental health crisis, or like they start experimenting with drugs, and I'm thinking about it as a dad right now, I'm freaking out. At some point, one of you in this classroom might be the first person talking to my girl, right? And I want to know that each and every one of you has sufficient training, right, and sufficient knowledge and expertise to be in a good position to do that. So that's kind of where I come from it. Like, I kind of bring like my personal family side into the classroom, because I'm preparing people who one day might work with my own family or the families of people that I come to know.
You know what? That's a good point. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because when I was a consultant doing inspections on sites and stuff like that back in the day, I used to kind of bring it in and from a personal level too, to try and help out, because I hated to be, I didn't like to be the person that was authoritative. I tried to level with them, and I had that trauma-informed approach also with them at the time. So, and I'll plug this in and we'll carry on in a second. For example, like tying off on a roof, right? There's certain people, and I've been there, man. I was a young guy. I used to stand on, you know, the double top plate of a wall 30 feet up while we're putting trusses up with nothing on. I've been there. I was that person at one point. But I've seen enough fatalities and workplace injuries and stuff like that, that when I became a consultant, I tried to bring it home with them. So I'd talk to somebody, and I'm just going to use the name John. You know, it'd be John. It's like, you know, do you have any kids at home? Do you do anything cool with your kids? He's like, yeah, we play hockey all the time. We play pond hockey. That's what we do in the wintertime. We go up to the cottage. That's what we do. Okay, cool. He says, what would happen to you if you fell? Well, I'd die. I says, maybe. Actually, the statistics show that even if you fall, you probably won't die unless you land on something that's going to kill you. You're going to be injured. It's going to cause you grievous bodily harm. Now, when you're done, can you imagine yourself not being able to go out and play with your 11-year-old son and play hockey again? And what are you going to tell him when you say, no, I can't go because I have a serious back injury because I chose not to be safe at work? Right? There's certain ways that I tried to mention that, like, I tried to plug that in, and they're like, well, you know, did you have to go there? I says, well, I don't know. And what are you working for? Are you working for your family? Right? There's the whole point is to give your kids and your family things that you enjoy doing, right? So he's like, okay, you make sense, right? Do they tie off every time? Did they when I saw them? No. Did they tie off when I saw them and I started walking by? Sometimes. Did they unclip when I left? Most likely. But it's just the family plug-in is important, I think, and that's a good point, because I think all of us, we're all pretty much dad's here at this, like, and it's the same thing. And one more thing that I want to mention is that next week is World Suicide Prevention Day on September 10th.
All right.
And when we think about the 1 in 5 people have thought of suicide. So if we think about those statistics and the demographic and the age differences or the age gap, like between 13 and 15 up to 30 and 35 of people have had suicide behaviors, thought of it, and were committed, you're right. If somebody is behaving in a specific way or starts to have a mental health breakdown or is in crisis, I want somebody who's trauma informed to be able to speak with them, because I'm hoping that that conversation is managed appropriately.
Yeah.
Because like we talked about briefly in our last episode, the moment at which that we meet them in a gym or a dojo could be the moment that they're waiting for to engage with somebody. And if that conversation is not managed the right way, if we're missing some of the cues, not that it's going to always be our fault, but if we miss it, we might miss an opportunity to make somebody a little bit happier or change the course of their day, right? So good point. Thank you very much. I'm not going to I don't want to steal the show too much today. So I just want to open up the floor, popcorn style questioning and stuff like that. And if you guys have comments that you want to leave on YouTube or even for the podcast and stuff like that, feel free, because we want to keep the ball rolling with this. So, I mean, the floor is open to you guys. I know you guys had a bunch of questions. We put a ton of notes. I'm not going to refer to them because the list is huge. But, I mean, go ahead, Mark. Jacob.
Well, do you feel like in the industry right now, one of the questions I thought about when I was, I can't remember which book I was listening to, if it was Body Keeps a Score, or if it was the other one with the...
Jamie Marich, the jiu-jitsu one?
Yes, I believe
Transforming Trauma?
Yeah, they were talking about how they were, a lot of the people that were coming in with trauma, they were given prescription, and then it was almost like it's become to the point where, because of, monopolizing on money, that's kind of like the go-to thing now, is they're not trying to really help people at the root of their issue and to kind of discover what it is where's the genesis of this trauma, and then trying to reverse engineer and go back and try to deal with it from the ground up. It's more if it's become an industry of like, okay, well, just take this. This is the symptoms you're taking. Take this. And it's kind of disheartening, because not only do these people have trauma, but now you're giving them an addiction. And, from somebody who's in that field, do you find that this has gotten worse? And why do you think it's gotten like that? And what's the number one result do you see coming from that when this is being abused that way?
Oh man, you lay out the territory perfectly. That's exactly how I would sketch it out if I was teaching it to people. It's just like, this is the problem, and so I'll reverse engineer this. I'll start from like, this is what it should look like if we're using meds, pharmacology, whatever you want to call it, right? We're using pharmaceuticals responsibly for trauma or any other mental health condition, by the way, especially ones that have, like, as we call like really intensive acute episodes. Like, all that means is just there's a flare up, like, oh geez, like, I'm not always panicking, but once in a while I might get a very serious panic episode, right?
Yeah.
How we should be using these medications. I got two analogies for this. So one is, depending on how severe someone's trauma symptoms are, right? You might need medication as a kind of stabilizing force. So the way I like to say this is it's like, imagine you're building a house, right? And to build that house, you need scaffolding to get to some of the higher places safely. I mean, you could try to MacGyver it and just like, I'm gonna hang from the ceiling, do these weird things, but it's so much safer to use scaffolding to kind of work your way up to places, but you're not gonna leave that scaffolding in there once you've built the structure, the strong foundation. This is exactly one of the key purposes of medication. It's to help stabilize someone so that it provides a space where, through therapy, through group support, through training in trauma-informed martial arts or somatic physical exercises, once someone has built all that foundation that was made possible by stabilizing, right, then you remove the scaffolding, right?
Yeah.
There's a similar analogy here. It's like I don't want to teach someone how to swim when they're drowning, right? It's like the time for teaching comes after, or you get to throw him a life preserver first, get him out of the water. Oh, okay, now we can teach you how to tread water a bit. Maybe that front crawl comes in. The other way I think of this is medication is most useful just to give someone a fair shake, like a fair shot at being able to benefit from all of this cool stuff that I can do, like whether it's, using education or psychotherapy, group support, counseling, training in somatic approaches, martial arts. I kind of liken it to like say Jacob and I are both going for a hike, and I'm wearing like a bag full of rocks and Jacob's got nothing on him, right? And then we both have the same kind of shoes. We're both in similar physical I'm thinking he's in better shape than I'm in. But
I doubt that. But...
You doubt that? Okay. But like we're like in similar starting, but the only difference is I've got this big bag of rocks on. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could just take out like half of that bag of rocks so that I can at least go hiking with him?
Yeah.
Right? Because hiking's the goal, right? Like the medication or taking out the rocks won't teach me how to hike properly. Like it won't teach me how to, breathe properly while I'm walking and have good foot placement, and like it won't teach me situational awareness. Oh, walking off a cliff, like it also won't teach me like a purpose for why I want to go for a hike. Like why do I feel like doing that anyway? Like, why am I going with Jacob? It's only going to make it possible for me to do it safely and effectively from the get-go. Now, Mark's point there was perfect. At some point, right, like it becomes obvious that continuing medication use or overloading someone with medication that they don't need beyond stabilization, like I was talking about, becomes counterproductive, which is best case scenario, by the way. Like the worst case scenario is like you were mentioning, it becomes severely dependence producing, right? Becomes addictive, people can abuse it, and in the worst case, people can critically injure, if not kill themselves with all sorts of substances. We were talking before we started, the opiates are probably the best example of how you could, the main mechanism is respiratory depression, right? It's the same thing that happens with alcohol, right? They're in a very similar family, and I've seen it, unfortunately had to deal with it very often with people that I work with. So the concern is 100% there. If I were like president of all of this, I would recommend the kind of approach that I started with. Like some people do need medication if their symptoms are severe enough that they can't even benefit at the starting gate, right, from any intervention.
Yeah.
But once they've built the structure, it's like the scaffolding. It's like, why would you leave the scaffolding in your foyer? It's like, we've already built the house. So why are we leaving it there? Like, we don't need it there anymore. We can safely remove it once structure is in place. If it were up to me, that's how I would, worldwide implement the use of pharmacology, medications, and these kinds of things. Yeah,
that's interesting. Do you have anything?
I love that. I love that actually. The example you used of the scaffolding, because it completely makes sense. So, my kind of question for this is continuation, because I feel like the system is broken simply because doctors have so many incentives from drug companies to prescribe, and then it all becomes about money and not human health. And would you agree that maybe the solution is to take those incentives out in some way or have them controlled? Because, I don't, what you're saying is great, but I don't see that solution working because unfortunately, human greed is real. And I just don't see that happening in many cases because, yes, there's great doctors out there. But there's also some bad ones. So like how would you fix the system so this kind of abuse doesn't happen?
First of all, 100% legitimate concern. 100%. Yes, the incentives are horrific, especially in parts of the world that have like more kind of privatized healthcare. Like I'm thinking of the States. I'm looking at you, the U.S., right?
Yeah.
And
without naming anything. But
without pointing the finger, USA at anyone. It's not the only part of the world, but it's one part of the world where, yes, you're right, Jacob. It's like doctors are incentivized. This is part one of the problem. They're incentivized to just prescribe. The other problem is that the vast majority of doctors, for good reason, like when you go to med school, man, it is not like, you're not counting crayons. It is a really complicated educational process, and
Yeah.
a lot of them will maybe do like 4 months of residency in like psychiatry. Like they'll learn a little bit about mental health, they'll learn a little bit about, trauma, I guess, but most of them don't receive anywhere near the kind of training that even you guys have been receiving just by hanging out with Eric. You know what I mean? Like, it's really sad. So what happens is that a doctor, you think of it from their perspective, right? There's like this biomedical model of treatment, right? Where Jacob comes in and he's like, yeah, so I'm not feeling too great. Okay, what do you mean you're not feeling too great? Well, I kind of worry about stuff right away, right? Through no fault of their own. As soon as Jacob says, I'm worrying, I'm anxious, they're already thinking medication for worry, and it's like when you only have a hammer, right? Everything's a nail.
That's right.
Right.
That's
That's
true.
another problem with this. I think that's why your concern is 100% legitimate. So if I were right away to suggest two additional,
I think that's the mic.
I'll just check.
I hope I haven't.
No, it's all good. We can continue.
Perfect.
We can edit that out.
Yeah. See, I'm a newbie at this, right?
It's all good.
So if there was two things, just responding to that concern, if there was two things I'd recommend, one would be, we need some way of pushing back against that system of incentives that just, it's heavily kind of like capitalist driven. It's like, profit, 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 but also, right, and this is what one of my favorite authors in this space, I'm sure Eric's heard of him, his name's Gabor Mate. He works a lot in addictions. That's what his main background is. He says we just need to train these doctors who are responsible for prescribing, even psychiatrists too. We need to train them and expand their repertoire, right? It'd be like if I went, if I went to Sifu Mark's class, right, and the only thing, like the only suggestion he had for anything is, I'm just going to teach you a leg kick, and I'm like, okay, but
I want you to punch through this bag. That's it.
really though, like that's all you can. Look, that's what I specialize in, man, right? I'm just going to teach you this one, but is that really going to help me? Like, what if someone takes me to the ground and they start putting top pressure on my chest and I can't breathe and they're going to trap my arm? No, dude, you just got to make sure you leg kick them first. Like, that's what a lot of people are experiencing in the doctor's office. Like, people like myself might come in and say, no, but you don't get it. Like, I need like a broader range of alternatives other than medication. So right off the bat, those are the two things I would recommend, is trying some way to counter that incentive. That feels like an ideal dream, but the one that seems more possible is educating doctors, physicians, psychiatrists way more in mental health and trauma.
Yeah, the trauma-informed approach is I think we're making it. The industry's making headway, right? The community is making some amazing headway, but we're really far behind. In one of the classes that I actually teach, there's a scene where there's an interaction between a patient and a doctor, and this is specific to suicide intervention, but the patient, they're talking about, having anxiety, not being able to sleep, they feel depressed, don't want to get out of bed, all that stuff. It's like there's, and I'm not saying like kind of like you said, doctors are needed. Like it's a stuff that's needed out there, but there's certain things that are just unknown. So I look at it from, you don't know what you don't know, right? And there's a knowledge gap there, but if we bridge that knowledge gap, we can help big time. And in this scene, it's just, okay, I'm listening, I'm hearing, like kind of like what you said. There's anxiety, there's a bit of depression, there's lack of sleep. Here, I'm giving you this, come back and see me. If you have any problems, give me a call right away. Now it breaks the scene, it follows up with some other stuff in this movie, and goes back to the scene with this doctor interacting with another one in the break room and saying, we just don't get enough time to, in between patients to do things, right? And then she gets a phone call sort of interrupting the conversation, and then finds out that patient had taken their life, right? And then there's that bit of guilt that's there and stuff like that, but the point of this part of the video and some of the stuff that we break down and do an analysis of afterwards is exactly that. You don't know what you don't know. If you can't recognize the signs during the discussion and what's being told to you, then it's hard to say, right? And if the only teaching that we have is from a diagnostic method, then that's what we're going to be trained, that's what we're trained to do. We're diagnosing as opposed to really looking at the issue. So I see that too, right? And it's kind of like what we talked about in the lecture, right? It's if we treat it like the trauma-informed approach, managing conversations, like naloxone, right? It's an inert substance. If it's not required, it's not going to hurt anyone.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you mentioned it, and I love it because it just makes sense. It's not going to hurt anybody if it's not required, but it will save somebody's life if it's needed. So understanding trauma, understanding the mental health aspect of the crisis epidemic that we're in, and just the behavior, just taking time to listen and actually engage in that conversation could make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's kind of where I'm going, like where I see it, right? And that was the whole point of us doing what we're doing now is, hey, this is what we recognize, go talk to Eric. All right? Let's work through this, then we can get back in. Yeah, we'll do this again. You just, take the time to go for a back and forth, and we're going to help somebody out much more, I think anyways, and be more beneficial to that person than them going back and forth and relying on, negative coping mechanisms, right? But like you said, and like the first aid thing, we have to have immediate response in some cases to be able to stabilize and get through, right? So I agree with that, and those are awesome points that are brought up. I don't know if you have any more questions in terms of that
So
too.
I think, tell me if I'm right, that the really good solution would be to sort of what we're trying to do, educate the public, because sometimes you can't rely on the doctors. And for example, if every job place has certain amount of training, and spotting addictions and depression, stuff like that, you can be like, hey, Susie over there, I think she has a problem. So sort of people can, sort of like a neighborhood watch. People kind of spot each other's problems and maybe address them. Would that be kind of a good idea as well? Sort of, if I can't rely on doctors, then I'll just rely on my colleagues because they might actually care more.
That's what a lot of people end up turning to. You're right. No, that's definitely one big way to address this. I'll kind of address a bit of what Eric said while answering your question, because they kind of come together. I love the way that you put that, and I like that resonated with you when I said that around how like a trauma-informed approach is like the best way of erring on the side of caution. It's like I've never interacted with someone in a trauma-informed way and had them go, "What are you saying to me? Like, you jerk!" Right? Like it's like you're so mean. Like no, I'm just like, it is the most kind and compassionate, just straightforward way of acknowledging and validating someone's experience and working with them at their pace, right? It's not about treating people like they're fragile or brittle emotionally or physically. It's about just understanding that people come, right, in all shapes and sizes, and they come from different places. And so the first way I would answer this is, what do those doctors need? They need to be trauma-informed. And most importantly, they need to be trauma-informed at the level of screening and assessment before the medications are given, right? We need to know, hey, this person that I'm talking to, has something happened to them, right? So I know Eric is familiar with this, and maybe you guys have come across this. Have you guys heard of the ACEs study, with the Adverse Childhood Experiences? It's this huge study that was conducted. It's called a longitudinal study because it took place over decades and decades, and they followed people who had experienced at some point in their early childhood some kind of what they called an adverse event, right? That could have been anything from either like physical, emotional, sexual abuse, exploitation, exposure to war, disaster, or just not having like an emotionally available, stable caregiver around.
Emotional detachment was huge in that study.
Big one, right? Neglect is huge. What they do is they compile it. Like, it sounds kind of crude, but they compile a kind of scoring system. And the more of these things that you have, it exponentially increases your chances of all sorts of terrible stuff later in life. But one of the big things, substance abuse, addiction. So doctors not carefully screening. So like if I came in, right, so Jacob and I had the same kind of, same kind of presenting issues, like, we're both kind of dealing with pain, or like back pain or whatever, and I come in, and unlike myself, right, Jacob kind of had like a fairly okay early childhood comparatively to mine. Mine say, this is not true, but mine say it was just riddled, like 7 to 8 of those major adverse experiences.
Yeah.
I am exponentially, the numbers are crazy. It's like 4,000 or something % more likely
God.
to develop an addiction to a substance like an opiate. Right, an opiate is, like, from the level of our central nervous system, it's not only good at addressing physical pain, but also emotional pain. Like when we say things like that hurts my heart, or like, that's not just us being, it's like
Soft.
metaphorical or hippy-dippy. We're like,
Yeah.
oh, you're breaking my heart. There really is, like, when people say like they're depressed and it hurts, that's a real thing,
Yeah.
right? I would be exponentially more likely to develop addiction compared to Jacob, right? And that's terrifying. And all it takes really is just for a doctor to ask a few pointed, appropriate questions like, hey, like, let's talk a little bit about, like, what childhood was like for you. And just because, hey, because if before we start you on this kind of medication, which, by the way, is potentially helpful, but also very dangerous and likely to be abused by a lot of people, I need to know a little bit about you first.
Yeah.
And the shocking, sad thing is that doesn't happen enough. So to come back to you, Jacob, yes, it is awesome when people like you and I, right, can come in and fill the gaps that are left by, I feel mean kind of saying this, by what is essentially a broken healthcare system, right? That doesn't.
There's a knowledge. There's definitely a knowledge gap.
Yeah,
right.
there's definitely a knowledge gap.
We see it.
I don't know if it's just knowledge, it's also just compassion, but you kind of answered my question, because what is, the standard of how do I assess a person coming in, and based on that assessment, how do I understand what medication and dosage do I give this person? Because the problem is if they are traumatized, and I believe some of that study was covered in The Body Leaves a Score too.
Body keeps score. Yeah.
yeah.
They
Yeah,
talk about
that's
the
right.
ACE score. Yeah.
Yeah, so these people are going to look to self-medicate regardless, because they want to numb, they want to forget, or they want a temporary sense of, just feeling good, right?
One of the common descriptions that, I don't know if you've heard it, but then you can get back to it, is it's like having a warm blanket.
Yeah,
That's something, when I hear people say that about something,
it's a soothing mechanism.
that's, my ears actually go up. When I hear that term, it's kind of one of those invitations and those things that I listen for. Because when I hear that, I'm like, okay, I'm actually gonna divert and focus my attention a little bit more and be way more open with that person if they start speaking that way. But anyways, continue. So
Yeah, they're gonna have this. They're gonna have this. This need to self-medicate regardless. Because so if somebody is in this mindset of desperation, emotional, and they need that because they just don't want to dwell or think about what they're going through, they're already in this kind of loop. Then when they go to a doctor, and the doctor's first thing is to give them the medicine, all they're doing is they're doing the same thing that person would have done, only with a prescription.
Yep.
And because it's a prescription and the title associated to the prescription, now the trust happens, and for me, in my eyes, all I'm seeing is that somebody who is authoritative is giving them okay to just be addicted to something else. For me, it makes no sense. And like, where's the accountability? Like, how do you know when somebody, like you were saying, like speaking to somebody, finding out a little bit about their story first, and then deciding what kind of person this is? That, for me, that makes more sense, because it's not just a blanket medication. I've done my job, go ahead and I get paid, and next. Because you cannot blanket everybody. Not everybody's problems are the same. Therefore, you cannot just prescribe them the same drug, And at what dosage, right? What are these people really going to get out of it? Nothing. They're going to have a codependency on drugs. And what are the side effects going to be? And what are you going to do? Now you're going to keep them on these drugs for how many years? Now they're going to be holding and storing this for so much more years until they have this breaking point of what? Overdosing? And then what? And then, why wouldn't it be first? I don't know. I know. I'm not trained in this, but I'm just speaking. But just as a person, just kind of thinking about it, if I'm going to deal with somebody first, I need to understand what their capabilities are before I give them anything at all.
Well, use one of your analogies. I mean, we talked about it in terms of training. Like, how do we approach a train?
That's what I'm
train
saying.
somebody, right?
That's what I'm trying to say. Like, I can't tell you, okay, listen, I'm going to teach you this. Like, I don't know what your coordination is. I don't know what your balance is like. I don't know what your natural abilities are. You know, I'm not going to try to make somebody with, you know, a certain body type, try to train him to be, you know, great at this when he'd be naturally more inclined to do that. And, you know, why isn't there kind of like, if I were to prescribe somebody some drugs, right? I would be like, hey, let's work through some of this first. Let's do some of this first. Let's see how this person reacts. And then how are you feeling? How many times a week are you feeling this? What are you doing when that happens? I think that's a big thing too. What are you doing? What do you, even if it's not with medication, like when you're not even to the point of medication, what do you do when you start to get depressed? What do you do when you get tired? What do you, how are you, what do you, what's your go-to? Are you just going to sit on the couch and dwell in it?
It's kind of like what we talk about when I talk about the stress continuum, right? Like,
That's
where
right.
were you? Where was your mind? What were you doing when you were in the green,
Yeah.
in the yellow, in the orange? How can we bring you back before you get into the red, right?
And that's why I think the medications should not necessarily be, I think it should be more of a last resort type of thing. But to make things complicated, you had a great analogy with regards to the throwing the lifesaver when someone's drowning, because sometimes they need that right away. They need that help. And so my question is like, how do you quantify when this is the measure versus that is the measure?
Man, you're really softballing some questions, eh? Like, geez, you guys have some really insightful questions. Fantastic. Okay.
I promised
First-
this was going to be a good episode, so.
First thing I wanted to say is my favorite part of episode 1. I sound like I'm a super fan. Okay, my favorite part of episode 1. I'm pretty sure, Mark, you're the one who had said this, right? And you were telling not a story, but it was like your general process. It's like your method. A person comes in and they're like, no, I want to learn how to fight, or like I want to learn self-defense. I want to listen BJJ, right? And I remember part of your response was something like you would ask a question like, okay, well, I mean, like, why do you want to train that? I mean, like, what brings you here today? Like, and the thing that you were searching for, and it sounded perfectly trauma-informed to me, maybe without you even knowing that you were doing it, is I want to know a little bit about this person's story. Like, was there an incident that happened in their life? Did they get jumped? Like, is this a bullying thing that they've been dealing with for a while? Now they want to fight back and just, get, have someone get their comeuppance. That is exactly what I'm talking about at the level of how we would approach, like, health professionals. The second part to your comment and question there was fantastic. I like the comparison here that I like to use because I get this question from clients all the time. By the way, client is a weird word in my field as a psychotherapist. It makes you sound like a lawyer or an accountant, right? We should be saying patients.
Patient,
but
yeah.
as a psychotherapist, we call them clients. It's such a weird thing. But anyway, the people that I work with, they often ask me like, oh, Carl, like, should I consider talking to my doctor about a medication, or, like, should I go talk to my psychiatrist about, starting like a benzodiazepine that's like an anti-anxiety drug, or should I go on an antidepressant?
That's a rough one too.
That's a rough one. Wait, oh yeah, exactly. Like, a lot of these drugs can be really rough. And the comparison that I give people is, think of sleep, right? Insomnia for a lot of people, right? But the first thing I ask someone is I say, okay, well, you're considering whether a medication might be the right thing for you. Have you exhausted all reasonable, I don't expect you to do 1,001 different superhuman techniques, but have you exhausted all reasonable, what we call sleep hygiene strategies?
Yeah.
Like, for example, like, just go through your checklist, like what's your bedroom look like? Like are you watching TV till 3 a.m? Guilty as charged, that's kind of me, right? Like, are you drinking coffee really late in the day?
Devices.
Like, are you working out a little late? That's one of my bad things too. I work out at like 9 p.m. sometimes, and I'm like, oh, why am I so jacked up before I go to bed, right?
Yeah.
Have you addressed? Yeah, everyone's like, oh, geez, stop.
Well,
personal attack, Carl. Yeah.
We all train in the evening.
You guys
right?
all
So-
train in the evening, right?
so-
Have you addressed most of those boxes on your sleep hygiene checklist? And they go, no. And I go, okay, well, let's pump the brakes. Let's pump the brakes before we consider what you were calling perfectly a kind of last resort intervention. Do we really need a potentially dangerous psychoactive substance that can get you hooked, or worse, that could cause an overdose, or that could negatively interact with other meds you might be on for like whatever it is, cholesterol or something else? Or should we try everything there is, right? You're not drowning yet, right? It sounds like this just sucks. Like, oh, I can't sleep. And it's like, you know, if you're drowning, maybe we do need to throw the life preserver. Not forever, right? We want to teach how to swim, right? But if you're not drowning, right? That's why I appreciate your question here, Mark. It's like, yeah, sometimes people need the life preserver, but a lot of the time, they're just given medication as a first response to what should be something like a last resort.
Yeah.
Right after they've exhausted. So in the mental health world, this is like, hey, what are your coping strategies like? What's your lifestyle like? Do you exercise? Do you, do you make time for social connections? Do you spend time with family? Like, is there family around for you? I will go through literally like a almost never-ending checklist. And if at the very end of that, that person says, Carl, I'm doing all of that, and I'm dying here, then I'm like, okay, this might be a life preserver situation.
Yeah.
So I'm 100% on board with you, Mark. Like, I would, just like in the case of sleep, I'd be like, have you exhausted all of those alternatives before you go to the medication, right? I believe in medication, absolutely, right, for the purposes I was talking about, but not at all as a first response when other responses could be so much more beneficial and not even like require medication.
Yeah, and I mean, like when we take in sleep hygiene, I mean, it's probably one of the most important things.
Oh yeah.
Diet is another thing. Like, so, and I can only imagine how long the list is that you have, because we've all at one point sat down and talked to each other about all of the things that we like to do and other episodes that we've had and things that we use as coping mechanisms and self-care, right? And it all involves some kind of activity. Doing something with someone or your dogs, that sort of stuff. Being with family. But you're right, I do agree, and there's always going to be, it's kind of like what we teach in the situation awareness and the self-defense thing, is that train so you don't have to fight, but sometimes there may be a situation where the fecal matter is going to hit the oscillator and sorry, right? It's going to have to happen.
Yeah.
You've done everything reasonable in the circumstances, but this is way beyond your control, right? So got to do it. I mean, like I said before we started, I've been there, sleep deprived, all this other stuff, and I had to do it, right? It couldn't happen without it. But the way I felt after the first night and the day that I woke up, I was like, this is not going to continue, right? It was rough, 100%, trying to regain sleep hygiene and get circadian rhythm back in order and all that other stuff, but it was rough. But I knew when I took it, it was not for me. Even when I had surgery, an appendectomy, stuff like that, like when I was going in for surgery, I was trying to tell them, because not only do I not want to be dependent on something, I am extremely sensitive.
Yes.
Although I'm a larger person, I'm still very sensitive to medication. And so I was trying to tell the nurse that was prepping me for surgery for my appendectomy. She's like, well, we're going to start you off with 5 milligrams of morphine. I was like, no, not going to happen. She's like, no. She's like, well, that's your body weight, and this is what we need to give you. I says, no. I said, start me at like 1 and then watch what happens. And sure enough, and it was actually somebody, my wife was there, and we actually recognized somebody from school that was one of the nurses helping me out. And a mil went in. A 2 mil went in and barely hit 2.5, and I was finished. And she's like, oh my God, like, really? And I'm like, yeah, like, I am sensitive to this stuff. So that's the other thing too, is that if I'm the patient, I'm relaying this to the doctor and the nurse, and I'm saying I'm hypersensitive to medication. I know myself. So you don't need to give me 5 or 10 mils. 2 is probably fine. So please start me small, because I don't want to be out forever. And so that happened. But then when I was done, they're like, oh, we're going to give you the morphine to take, right? They put me on that the first night that I was in the hospital, and I had the worst night terrors ever in my life. I came home, I took it again, because again, the pain was great. It was huge. I woke up in the middle of the night terrors. I grabbed the bottle and flushed it down the toilet. it's finished. I'm not doing this. Right? I couldn't do it. It's just not for me. But I also knew that there's going to be, if it got to the point where I was taking enough where those night terrors weren't happening anymore, then something else was going to occur. Right? Possibly. I'm not saying that it could or that it would have, but there's a possibility there. Yeah. Right? So was the recovery more rough? Yes, 100%. But I had to find my own coping strategies to deal with it. So I get it. Sometimes we have to have it because, hey, that's a lifeline. Recovering from surgery, recovering, somebody that's on pain meds because they survived a massive car crash, all of the other stuff. Yes, those are compounding issues. They're traumatic events and things that we're going to have to navigate later on in life. But adding a force multiplier with, an opiate addiction, a sleep medication afterwards, I mean, that's huge.
Oh yeah.
Right? So being trauma informed, I think and again, using post-traumatic growth therapies, salutogenesis. You mentioned something, you sent it to us, and I wanted to touch a bit about that. I don't know if you guys had a chance to watch it, but ACT.
Yes.
There's that thing, something you were interested in when you first started, that your supervisor, you said, that's what he does. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so ACT.
What that approach is, like for the viewers, especially and the listeners, yeah?
Absolutely. I won't turn this into too much of like a lecture, but I could talk about this for days. But ACT is an acronym for the style of therapy that I specialize in. It's called acceptance and commitment therapy. There are so many therapies out there, but this one I'm really drawn to. And it really is ACT for a reason, not ACT. We call it ACT because it's ultimately all about like getting out of your head and into your life. This is why ACT is really well connected to what we call like somatic approaches or body-based approaches, behavioral approaches. Like in order to change how I think and feel, I just have to start doing things differently. I can't just say things to myself, but ACT fundamentally is about, I guess the way that we can relate it to what we've been talking about is it takes almost an opposite approach to like this biomedical model we've been talking about, where it's like someone presents with symptoms and they're taught to believe that all of those symptoms are by definition bad because they deviate from this ideal of like perfect normality of like, we should always be feeling good. We should always be feeling not
When I was doing
stressed.
my trauma course, if I would have gone with if I would have filling out the chart, doing my traumagram, the ACE score, if I would have listened to everything that was on there, and I took it literally, I'd be admitted. Right?
Sure.
I was like, whew, I am one messed up dude. But then you get later on in the course and it's like, okay, this approach is not bad and these scores are useful for me. And just now I know myself a bit more and I have that self-awareness, and then let's carry on. But when you first read it, it's like, okay, well, here's my intake. This is what I'm doing. I'm checking off these forms. I add up the scores, and then I take a look at all these definitions. Here's what your score means. I'm like, well, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I'm truly, for the lack of a better term, fucked, right?
Yeah.
But like you later find out, this is a natural approach to deal with it.
Right.
We're going to do that motivational interviewing after trauma. We're going to go through the resiliency and education and stuff like that. Didn't mean to cut you off, but it just made me think of the checklists, right?
No, it's actually totally relevant to what I was about to say. So the whole point behind ACT, right, is to start off with what is not within our control most of the time. So most of the time, we can't control what thoughts come into our head. We can't control how we feel moment to moment. It's almost like we have this like internal like weather that's always going on, and we get lucky sometimes. Like, the example I give is like, like when it's time to go to the gym, or for you guys, when it's time to go training, it's like you might get lucky, right? And the universe or God or whatever hands you a nice, it gives you a solid and makes you energized and motivated. Yeah, I'm gonna go train today. I'm pumped. A lot of the time it's not like that. Like, oh my God, I'm just so busy and my mind's all over the place. I don't want to go in today. I'm sore. I'm injured. My shoulder, right? You don't pick that, right? We don't control a lot of our kind of starting conditions in any given moment.
Yeah.
What we do control, if anything, is how we respond to those starting conditions. So ACT stands for literally accepting what I can't control right? And not just like, biting down on the mouthpiece, like Shaolin monk style, like, no, I'm going to eat it. Like, it's more like being willing to experience what sucks,
Yeah.
right? First of all, because a lot of what sucks has value, right? It teaches us about what we care about, but also, right, it's understanding that we don't need to feel good in order to do the things that matter to us, right? We don't need to feel perfectly okay in each moment in order to move towards our values, to be the people that we want to be, right? The men we want to be, the fathers, the husbands, whatever it is, like the coaches and trainers, therapists, right? And a lot of the biomedical model, to bring this back full circle, is premised on this idea of like, well, look, I mean, like Eric's only going to be able to go, train jujitsu tonight if he feels motivated enough, if he feels like happy, like if he has at least enough energy physically and emotionally. Otherwise, he's just not, right? So how about we give him something, right, to bring him up to a sufficiently good feeling? What that's doing is that's kind of training you into thinking the only time I could ever show up for things in my life is when I am feeling this. Exactly.
Yeah.
If I hit like this peak little physical, emotional.
You're tricking that dopamine dome.
Yeah. Right. Now, one thing that happens to quickly connect this to addiction, I promise I'll stop talking. I'm such a
this is good.
Just a long-winded person. But what happens is that our central nervous system, right, like the whole, like the whole mind body, right, will learn to adapt to this very quickly, right? It's almost like you develop a tolerance to like feeling just okay, and then after a while, just okay is not enough anymore. You need a little bit more to feel just even better, to feel okay again. And then you notice, oh my God, like I am using increasing amounts of this medication, right? Mm-hmm. To put it a really poignant way, one of my clients said to me once, he goes, Carl, I don't, whatever it is, I don't drink, I don't use opiates or, like snort cocaine to feel good or to feel high. I do it to not feel bad. I do it to not be sick. And that hit me really hard. I was like, oh man, he had gotten to such a point where like his level of okay would have been,
his baseline is like,
his baseline would have been our like euphoria day. Like, yes, this is great. For him, it became just a flat, I'm just surviving.
That's hard.
Yeah.
Because and I don't want to get overly medical with the terminology, but when we talk about the central nervous system and that tricking that's going on with the desensitization, I guess, so to speak, for the lack of a better scientific term, with the dopamine side, it sounds like it's messing with the ANS, like the autonomic nervous system, the polyvagal stuff that could be really good with respect to a salutogenic approach or an ACT approach, right? So that's kind of what I'm getting there, is that we're drowning out what a standard autonomic response should be, kind of like, when we go through trauma responses where it's beneficial to go through stage 4, shake it out essentially, as Peter Levine says, understand the situation and make peace with it, and then we carry on, right? So it sounds like from this perspective, like when we get that dependency is the word I want to use, because that's essentially what our mind and our body is dependent on.
Yeah.
Is that coping mechanism that it got me to go.
Yes.
It's almost like a stimulant, right? People use like pre-workouts. Well, eventually it gets to the point where they only will work out if they have a pre-workout to help them get up and go.
Bingo.
Yeah. Dependency.
Right? So they're dependent on it. And then if you take away the pre-workout from them, over time, 2 weeks go by, a week might go by, and it's like, I could still work out. But you don't have the same vigor when you start your workout. It takes you 4 or 5 sets to kind of get that motivation to keep going, right? And then after 2 weeks, you start to lose, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like over time, it takes that much longer to retrain the mind and the body.
Oh yeah.
To use and cope from the ANS side of things,
yes,
and restore that polyvagal nerve response, if I'm making sense there. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
It also makes sense in how the somatic approach is important, because when you're doing something like training martial arts, I don't have time to be thinking about my bills.
No.
like I came in today and he asked me, I was like, hey, where you at today? I said, I'm not having a good day. Right? But
I was getting choked out by my wrench.
all that shit goes out the window because now I have to be engaged. And so it's a time for, it's a opportune moment for my brain to put that down because it's now engaged in something else. And in the Body Keeps the Score, where these kids have been through traumatic stuff, and then they show them pictures, and it could be a picture of a kid playing with his dad, or the one example was the guy who was working under his car, and the kids who had the traumatic experiences, they would always look for something bad that was going to happen in the picture.
Yeah.
Right? And so my question is, like, if this person's fixated and always trying to look for the negative or look for that, when they're having these episodes, or like they're constantly waiting for something bad to happen, or they're always dwelling with their trauma that's been stored, they're always constantly thinking about it. That's what's gonna make them even more want to have that relief even more, right? So that's gonna be a very strong drive to have that medication. But instead of necessarily having that medication, if they substituted that with something like training, painting, doing something, and I'm not sure, is most of the people that end up falling into addiction, what is their support system like? Are these people usually alone?
A lot of the time.
So that answers my question, because if I don't have a support system, if I don't have an active, I play pool, I play soccer, I do this, I do that. If I don't have that thing that allows my mind to disconnect from my trauma and stop dwelling in it and having that internal dialogue all the time, I have that moment of rest, which is the relief. But if I don't have that, for sure they're going to fall into the drug. For sure they're going to fall into the drug. And then they're going to get stuck like that, right? So when you have people come to you, do you guys have programs designed where you get them to do certain workshops, like anything that's physical or painting or artistic? Or do you guys recommend doing that stuff as well when you guys give them medicine, like so that they're not just relying on the drug itself as the quick fix and I'm done? Or do you guys provide them resources to like kind of get that somatic training?
Absolutely, yeah. So first thing I'll say is that, and I'm so glad I'm not in this position. I don't even have the training, the expertise, or the licensing. Thank goodness I'm not in the position to even prescribe medication. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
I'm a registered psychotherapist. Like usually only like clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors. If I were in that position, and if I was like, like if I had my way on like an advisory board, like kind of like telling people, here's what we should be trying to do, it would be absolutely in line with what you're suggesting. And like the example I gave around sleep hygiene is like, guys, have we exhausted, most lifestyle changes, most somatic changes, most training changes? Like, have we tried to apply in this person's life as many changes as possible to positively address what they're going through, right? The example that you were giving before really struck a chord with me, because it's what my entire approach, not just to trauma, but like the kind of therapy that I do, ACT, right, relies on this idea that, like I said it before, where it was like, you've got to get out of your mind and into your life, into something, right? What a beautiful description you gave a moment ago, where it was like, hey, I came in, I did a dojo, I'm guessing, where it was like, how this, can we swear?
Yeah,
It's
I
just so
swore.
much more natural.
Yeah, let it
I'm
go.
gonna start dropping F-bombs. I'm just
Let it
kidding.
go.
Okay.
Let it go.
But like, I just a shitstorm up there. It's just, oh, I got this to worry about, finances, and there's family stuff, and oh man, geez, and I got all this stuff going. And okay, sure, some styles of therapy would recommend, okay, Mark, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna work through each and every one of those challenges. We're gonna really carefully, meticulously, almost like debate each of those. Is it really that big of a problem? And how do we problem solve? A lot of that's just going to deplete you mentally, like, oh my God. And then your mind's always going to fight back and find a reason to still be upset.
Yeah.
But we have this strong negativity bias, right? It filters out the good.
But it's
More
like
and
you said,
more.
you look for the bad stuff sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Depending on the level
Program.
of traumatic
Oh, man.
events.
You're programmed to do it.
By evolution, we are
Yeah.
designed to be ultimately amazing threat detection. We are so good at just scanning for things going wrong, right? But exactly as Mark was just putting it, right? The one thing I recommend to most people is, okay, look, you can't control how you're feeling right now or what thoughts you have, but man, you will notice that you can change how you feel and how you think in any given situation by changing what you're doing, right? It is the most powerful start. I don't mean doing like taking a medication. I mean actually engaging in an activity, which I'm sure in your case, martial arts is like top shelf, you know, like in terms of what matters, where I find meaning and significance is challenging,
Yeah.
you know, like if I could just tell a really, really, really quick story. So my 10-year-old daughter, when she was 7, I was introducing her to those Marvel movies, you know, like Iron Man and Thor and all that stuff.
Yeah.
We're watching them, right? And at some, like, I think we had just finished like the first Thor movie, and then I'm putting her to bed one night, and she's like, Daddy, I'm trying to impersonate her. She's like, Daddy, I wish I was brave. And it broke my heart. I was like, oh, buddy, I think you're totally brave. She's 7 years old. I'm like, I totally think you're brave. What do you mean, no? What do you mean you think you wish you were brave? And she goes, you know, like, I wish I was like brave people, you know, like they don't get afraid. I was like, oh. What did my daughter get wrong about bravery or courage? She goes, I wish I was like brave people, you know, people who never get afraid.
Yeah.
What did she get wrong?
Well, that people don't get afraid, right? Fear doesn't exist or shouldn't, right?
Bravery, exactly.
Is the willingness to act. Willing
Bingo.
to act in fear.
Bravery is impossible without fear.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not impressed by people who don't get afraid. That actually scares me. Oh man, like they actually lack a
I
sensitivity.
got some other stories to talk about.
Oh
about
man,
other things like
people
that.
who don't experience genuine fear have no true understanding of risk and like no ability to detect danger. That's like me not having sensation in my hand and like, whoops, over a fire, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I explained this in my own way to my daughter, not with all this complicated stuff, but I was like, you know, and then she goes, oh, like lights just pop up and she goes, oh, so you're saying that being brave is doing something even when I'm scared? Like doing something hard even if I don't feel good? And I go, yeah, that's a really good description. She goes, that sounds like a superpower. I go, damn it, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. You don't have to feel good to do amazing things.
That's right.
And I think the biggest mistake we make in our healthcare system is subtly convincing people that they have to feel a certain way with medications usually to do tough stuff.
But I mean, this is the culture we're in right now. It's
Social media is a big.
Yes, I was just
So
about
the
to say
what
the
was that?
social media.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's like we're in this culture of instant gratification, the dopamine levels. It's almost like they need to be on hyperdrive all the time, right? And sadly, we get that, right? So what's the next fix? We were talking about it before you guys showed up. Is the attention span on Instagram? Like if you want to upload a reel, for example, the best thing is 90 seconds. Yeah. I mean, what happened to our society where we can only get 90 seconds of somebody's attention?
No, you can't even get that.
Well, actually, that's what
No,
he
I
said,
think
because
it's
when
like-
he looked
I
at the
think it's like
analytics,
8
it's less than that.
seconds. It's like, it's ridiculously low. Yeah.
Yeah,
You're right.
But it's interesting, and I think, I mean, we could probably have you on a few more times to cover a lot more information. If I could recap a little bit here in terms of what it is, like one of our biggest things, and we talk about it at the lecture, you and I have tons of conversations, we have conversations about it. We got to exhaust all resources first before, again, if required, medication may be the last resort, right? And it might be, like you said, a scaffolding, and it could be that life preserver that's required. And like I said, I'm not shy about saying it. I've had to do it, but it's not where I wanted to stay, right? Because I knew right away, especially the effects that I felt. Yeah, they help in terms of pain. Did it help me sleep? 100%. How I felt when it was gone out of the system the first couple of times was not something I ever wanted to experience ever again. So, and that's just me. Where I want to drive in, and actually when we're done the recap too, is we're looking at, we want to have a trauma-informed approach. We want to have that discussion, find out where you're coming from, what do we want to do, what's the objective here, how are we going to move forward. We talked about it upstairs too, is like, what can I do at this moment? What can we do to move ahead, right? How do I act?
Yeah.
Right? And be in the present right now, and then let's carve a path forward from what we now know. The other side of things too is that we all talked about it, but it's not just the ACE score that we're looking at sometimes. It is a huge driving factor in a lot of the diagnostic side of things. But we didn't even scratch the surface on epigenetics and core values and generational trauma stuff.
Yeah, that's huge.
Right? There's all kinds of other things that happen there.
Yeah.
And that are carried forward. So again, we could have a whole other episode on that alone that influence somebody's behavior and how they're going to cope with something even before they know it. Right? That stuff is driven from the cradle to the grave if we don't understand the concept and what's really driving us as beings as we're walking the earth. And yeah, I gave a huge, it sounds, how would I put it? Anyways, I can't think of the term right now, but it sounds cosmic when I say it that way. But I mean, studies have been done, and you know, Dr. Paul Conti, I think Peter Levine talks about it in one of his books. You know, there's expressions and behaviors in the human being that manifest themselves in children or even adults, even from traumatic experiences that were the mother carrying the baby would have experienced, that has been carried on through into the child. And even some of the stuff during birth, for example, are carried on. And somatic, like stored energy, is in the body from, you know, a difficult birthing session. So there's a ton of things that if we just took a few times to ask a few questions, you know, if we actually dove into, let's say, and I shouldn't say we because I'm not a doctor, but if they really dove into medical history and truly understood a trauma-informed approach from a medical history perspective,
Yes.
We can change, like the trajectory of where we're going right now could change drastically. We talked about social belonging, right? I mean, if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what is one of those needs? It's that social interaction. And we talked about it the last episode. COVID took a ton out of us, right?
Yep.
We were already heading, and I think anyways, and I don't want to be the prophet of doom, I say that a ton, but we were already heading in a bad direction, I think. And when COVID hit, we just put a force multiplier on it. We took away a lot of those positive coping strategies, the physical interaction that we could get, the social interaction, the peer support groups that were huge, those that are religious, able to go to a church, to be able to use that spiritual connection, like the ability to go to the gym, right? To go to the training center, to do stuff that really helped us out. And then what did we all turn into, or not turn into, but turn to? We talked about it, we had a joke about
Alcohol and drugs.
Yeah, we sat at home. Man, it was a tough day. I got nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Might as
I'm gonna have a
well,
beer.
Yep.
And then one beer turns into two.
Well, we also mimic what we see, right? So
Well, you see it on TV, yeah, and I mean, and this is not, by the way, everybody, and for those listening, us having a scotch here is not to promote having a drink all of the time. This is just what we, this
So
is
we're not
something that-
sponsoring anyone right now?
No, we're not sponsored, that's why the glasses are clear. Single malt is what we like though. Anyways, but that's what happened, right? We Hollywoodized things, we saw what we saw, and we were given TV as a way to just kind of sit and be with ourselves, but we got buried in our brains, and then this didn't help, right?
and much to what Carl was saying too, is how his daughter had a different understanding or perception of what the word meant. And I think a lot of people today, because of social media, things like this and others, is we have this misunderstanding or misperception of what happiness is, or fulfillment, or normalcy, or, you know, so many things like that. And then I think what happens is, you know, being happy. What is happy? You know, I'm supposed to be happy. Everybody's happy. I look on Instagram, this person's smiling, this person's fit, this person's on vacation, this person's doing this. Everybody's happy. Fuck, I'm not happy. You know, why am I not happy? What's wrong with me? And then it's just, they're creating this illusion of himself.
Yep.
and again, going back to being stuck in your own mind, but it's like we what you were saying before about, you know, not always feeling good is okay,
Absolutely.
and it's fine, but it's also not good to dwell in it either.
Yeah.
And man, I don't think that conversation is had enough, especially with the youth, because we're allowing them to learn these ideas of fulfillment, happiness, value, and it's all distorted poison. And you know, I think the reason why a lot of people, especially in Western society, are so depressed is because they're constantly chasing a blueprint that is not meant for them. And you will never feel fulfilled if you're constantly trying to chase a why that was never yours, but you were taught to believe it was. And like, how do you fix that? Of course you're gonna break. Of course you're gonna self-medicate, because there's no fulfillment. There's no fulfillment in your search. However, if you experience life and adversity in positive settings like martial arts, or you know, sports, or you learn to express yourself, what makes you happy, then you can kind of start to analyze why you're happy, right? Then you're going to start to understand what makes you tick, and then that becomes your drug. You medicate yourself with that. And I think that's a better, and again, I'm just talking out of my ass here, but I have been through, you know, depression. I have been through, you know, self-medicating. I've never taken any prescriptions because I knew that's not where I wanted to go, you know, but you're not going to learn how to grow through something without pain.
Yep.
And I think that's why I liked martial arts as well, is because the sense of confidence and the physical stuff, that all comes through the work, but it was every day I survived.
Yeah.
And I learned how to deal with being vulnerable, but I knew that it was making me have it's almost like callousing my emotions. And it's okay to feel like that. It's hard at first. It's really hard at first. You don't want to go back to a place where you just got manhandled.
Oh yeah.
You know, it makes you doubt yourself, and like, it's not easy.
Nope.
But what's harder is not having a light at the end of the tunnel. And that's the other thing too. I think when people just take medicine, great. How long? Where's the milestone? How long am I going to take this for, and when do I know I don't need it? How am I going to build myself up to not needing this while I'm taking it?
Yeah.
There's none of that, you know? So at least through physical exertion and experience, you don't just go through the motions, you grow through the motions.
Yeah. No,
That's really well said.
That is, and I can't remember that it's the Eastern term. Like, it's an old. You said it was Chinese, or was it a Japanese method of repairing?
Oh yeah, so that's called kintsugi.
Right.
Yeah, so
and
it's
I thought that was really cool because
Oh,
it speaks to exactly what
fantastic.
you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So can you explain that just briefly?
Yeah, so kintsugi is, I'm not like an expert in it, I don't have any kind of craft going on, but from
I
what
saw
I
it
understand,
in one of your reels though, right? And it
oh,
just
well,
it resonated
because
with me.
I found this as such an amazingly powerful metaphor for the kind of work that I do, especially with folks who've experienced trauma. So you guys have heard of that, so the philosopher Nietzsche, right, had said something that like gets terribly like misquoted out of context, and people don't really understand what he means. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
And we talked about that too, because there could be some negative connotations into that, right?
So I would reframe that. I'm not going to try to correct one of the most, prolific, like amazing philosophers of all time, but he should have said, what doesn't kill you can, but won't absolutely, necessarily, automatically make you stronger.
Yeah.
Okay, how do I relate this to this? Okay, the idea is we are creatures who, like Mark was describing really well, who can become better versions of ourselves. We can substantially improve, not in spite of pain, Not like, oh, just like despite the fact
I'm
that
going
I
to
was
show
hurt,
you, yeah.
because of pain. It is only by being subjected, being pushed safely, appropriately, you know, like you don't want to bash someone's head and you're not coming back from that, but, oh, I guess maybe you can, but
Not the
certain
same.
types of, yeah, certain types of adversity in the proper context, and I'm thinking here exactly of a well-facilitated dojo, like the ones that you guys run, right? Like a trauma-informed dojo can actually teach people how to emerge almost moment by moment into better versions of themselves. Sometimes incrementally in small steps, other times big breakthroughs by experiencing uncomfortable stuff. So what is this art? So it's called kintsugi, and it's the art of taking like a vase or a bowl that's been like damaged, right? Like just, oh crap, it drops, right? And it's the art of taking that vase and repairing it with like a gold lacquer, right?
Yeah, I've seen it, yeah.
Right. When you reshape the bowl, first of all, not only is it just beautiful
Looks
to look, oh my
amazing,
God, it
yeah.
looks amazing. Like, wow, why wasn't the bowl just made like that in the first place? But it's also stronger because now you got all of these like stronger base metals, well, gold being a big one, right? You have a stronger metal going through the entire thing, and it makes, okay, is it like infinitely strong? No, it could probably smash again pretty easily. It's stronger than the, bingo, tempering, beautiful. That's exactly what I'm thinking of. And we are like that, right? A lot of things in the world aren't, like glass. If I drop glass, it's a fragile object. We are what's sometimes called anti-fragile. We can improve by being
Broken.
hurt, by being broken.
Yeah.
Or in some cases. That's what I love. I mean, to give you guys another plug when it comes to trauma-informed, like huge potential for healing, a martial arts space can be one of the best places, like you were saying, Mark, not just to build confidence, like, man, like what if the shit went down and I had to protect myself and all of my conflict mediation strategies failed, and that's great, but also it's a space where people can safely, really deeply grow, not just up here, but to feel better in their bodies, to feel better in their emotions, to regulate their emotions, to not, you know, like you guys were telling funny stories of people kind of like going berserk when they're white belts, like trying to just,
It happens, right?
Well, it totally
Yeah.
happens, right? That's what I love about martial arts, and why I want to return to it so much. It provides a space for people to grow through being harmed in the right ways.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I wanted to add that in because you made me think, and I couldn't remember the term kintsugi.
I'm probably not pronouncing it
Yeah.
well.
But
If someone's out there thinking, "Oh my God, this guy just
But
bastardized it."
you made me think of it, and it's like like you said, it's tempered, and yeah, we're anti-fragile, but sometimes when we repair, we come back, and I don't want to use this term and sound fluffy or anything like that, but we come back more beautiful. We come back better, right? We chose to be better instead of bitter,
Oh, that's nice.
right? And move forward, right? Like that's the idea behind what we want to do and what we're trying to achieve. And I mean, we've got a ton of information in the amount of time that we've spoken today too. And we can cover so much more, but we've covered, you know, options for somatic healing through the martial arts side of things. We've covered, you know, sometimes it's okay to, you know, we absolutely need it at the very, if it's absolutely required, we have to have some medication, right? As an immediate first aid thing, and sometimes it's necessary, but understanding limitations, understanding the expectations, knowing exactly what the purpose is, like you said, in terms of the training. Why are we doing this? I need to know. So being informed as a medical practitioner, I think it's huge. And I'm not trying to bash the medical industry, but it is something that we really need to pay attention to, because we're in trouble right now. I think we are anyways. And our kids need better. Our kids deserve better. And if we can create a society, or if we could help foster a trauma-informed approach in society that our kids are going to be able to benefit from later on, I mean, I'd love it, right? That'd be amazing. Again, you're never going to hurt somebody's feelings or cause a conversation to go sour by being nice to them.
Yeah.
And asking questions. It's just not going to happen unless they're complete sociopaths and narcissists and part of that whole dark triad, which again is a great book, or don't have feelings or don't feel afraid. then yeah, start paying attention to something else and maybe just walk away. But the point is having that trauma-informed training. Bridging the knowledge gap, I think, is a huge thing. Understanding that there's more coping, there's more strategies in terms of therapy than just having a medication.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes combining all of those things and having a huge plan, like for example, and again, we're just scratching the surface, but having that medication plan, immediate response, but saying, here, this is only going to happen for this amount of time, but I also want you to follow this.
Yep.
Right? Here's the other supports. I need you, and I'm advising that you have a peer support group. Here's this group here I know does really great stuff for people that are in a situation like you. What you're going to do from there is also follow their model and then continue on from there.
And log it.
Right? And then log all this stuff. But also, they're going to also report back, right? So kind of like what you and I had talked about, where we have the constant communication, where here's the progress we're seeing, and maybe there's some regression, so we'll revisit a few things as we go along, but that's okay, right? Regression's fine because shit happens.
Yep.
But we're progressing positively and we're going to grow from it. And that's how I see it, really. And that's the message we want to get across with respect to the subject of this episode, or the many subjects, if that makes sense. Did I kind of cover all of that
I think so.
adequately?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you do want to get some really good training in learning how to manage your stress and anxiety, most of you in the GTA are Leafs fans. So you're probably already really good at that. That's why I have this on. So apologies, later on for the trigger warning. But we get used to it. They do really well in the first period and they just dump it in the last. So, but I love you guys, Leafs. There's hope, right?
That's what we say now.
That's what we say now, and that's what we say every season. But anyways, that's my little plug for today, and it's a little bit of a joke there. But if you guys have any questions, again, please leave them in the comments. I feel like we didn't have enough time to touch what we wanted to talk about, but we want to keep the episodes around the 120.
We'll just have to have Carl back, that's all.
We have to have him back, maybe
absolutely.
3 or 4 times. And
That's
then
great.
yeah, we'll have a hot tub episode, maybe. Anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. But thank you very much, Carl, for joining us. The insights are awesome. We're going to, Mark and I, or not Mark and I, but Carl and I are going to work on a little bit of collaborate on an article to kind of give a little bit more detail and provide some more information and resources with respect to what we talked about today. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for another episode. We have another, the next one with a special guest. He's first responder. He does some amazing work with boots on the ground. And he's one of my fellow students when I got trained in assist. And we've kept in touch. He's a great man. His name is Rob Lethan. His artwork, if you check out his stuff on the web, absolutely amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. Beautiful paintings. Some of them, they really get to you, but check it out. I strongly urge that. And we're going to talk about, how first responders had to deal with, the post-traumatic stress and their coping mechanisms, coming back from thoughts of suicide and stuff. So it's going to be a really awesome episode with him. So stay tuned for that. That's it for me for now anyways. I don't want to keep rambling. Any last things from yourself? Oh, my daughter made these, so just a little plug. Thank you, Charlotte. They're beautiful. So maybe this is something, bracelets by Charlotte for support of mental health. Maybe we're starting something. Hashtag that.
Yeah, why not?
There we go.
Just
trying to plug in everything here.
in a moment. That was awesome. Yeah.
What about yourself, Mark?
I just think, before I just think it's a very slippery slope when getting into medication. I'm not educated enough to really speak or advise on it, but I would say for myself, when I was going through my dark times, that was just something that I made a decision to myself that I'm not gonna seek that avenue unless I've, seen what other resources I had, and I'm glad that I had that mental fortitude to do that, because I found that I've grown so much more, matured so much more, and I learned a lot more going through it, let's say, the hard way, And just like in martial arts, you know, you teach somebody to just pull out a weapon when they're confronted. You know, you're giving them that force multiplier right away, and they're relying on that thing, but they haven't learned how to make themselves the weapon yet. And what they've done is they've just entered a dynamic into this situation that they're not going to be able to control and actually make things worse. So before using that weapon, learn to use your weapon, be the weapon. And I'm trying to relate that into before you take that pill, you know, learn how to find natural, positive ways of coping rather than just giving that quick fix, because the quick fix is good, but it's not permanent. Nothing in life worth achieving is easy to achieve it. So sometimes it is dark and it feels dark, but understand that there's a reason for you being here. There's a reason for what you're going through. Speak to people, find solace in expression, in physical things and spiritual things and artistic things, but do things as opposed to just relying on a substance of any kind. I just my thought.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
I think, follow what Mark said, I think we really have to focus more on educating people about lifestyle changes. Because a lot of the problems they have, not all, of course, you can eliminate by just changing your life completely. So like I said, sleep well, eat well,
Yep.
exercise, have a good group of people. Just by having these things, all of a sudden, you know, half of your problems could be gone simply because you realize, oh, the world is not this dark place that hates me. You know what I mean? And you know, we also have to look at things like, like Mark said, not everything is easy. Sometimes things are hard in life, and we have to educate that, you know, through, you know, from like the youngest. So we have to stop giving participation trophies. Yay, Jimmy. You know what I mean? No, you lost.
Work hard.
Work hard.
But I'm giving you tools.
Yes.
We need to train. Right?
Exactly.
Here's what happened. Let's
Exactly.
work through this.
Give 'em a
yeah.
path.
But without just giving a pat on the back saying good job, they learn from the beginning that they don't really have to put much effort to get an award, right? And then later in life, they realize, oh, that's not how life actually works.
Why is it so hard?
Exactly. Oh, life is so hard. I'm like, yeah, someone should have told you that a long time ago. So I think we need to kind of start from you know, young children, educate them on certain things early, and then that can avoid a lot of problems down the line.
Yeah.
Man, yeah, can't top that. Mark, I love that analogy between teaching someone in the use of a like force multiplying weapon before they learn how to use themselves, like their own body, as the weapon that then can have. And I totally agree, Jacob. Like early intervention, as I would call it, is just like getting in there as soon as we can at the ground level, especially with our kids, and teaching this stuff as early as we can. If I would add anything to this, or just kind of like cap it in my own way, I'm 100% in agreement with you guys when it comes to the medications. 100%. Like the way I would put it in the work that I do, I simplify it with my clients by saying, so much of what we do can be conceptualized as either moving away from what hurts, right? Avoid, escape, control strategies like, this doesn't feel good, I don't like it, I gotta do something. And sometimes that's just, oh, I don't like it, or I don't like it, or just, I'll take my phone, I'm bored for a second, right? Versus moving towards what we care about, what we value. And often when we're moving towards what we care about, it doesn't feel good, right? Mark was given a great description of that before. It's like when you were training, I remember what this is like. It's been a while, and I'm shamelessly gonna kind of try to enter into your space soon. I want to get back into martial arts. And I remember back in the day when I was training, I would get my ass handed to me by people half my weight and who didn't look, just a totally unassuming physique. I thought, oh, I'm training weights, I'm going to be a tough guy. Absolutely ragdolled and controlled. It was humiliating. But at the same, as soon as it would end, I would have this motivation deep down. It was somewhere. It was like, hey, this is good for me, because a moment ago I thought that I could really handle this person, and I was wrong.
Yeah.
And so, like, moving towards what's good for us, what matters, it's not always going to feel good, but moving away from what hurts. The big example for today being, you know, like the temptation to just take a medication, to use a drug, whatever it is, to just like dissociate from our experience for a little bit. It's good in the short term, but it's not going to help you in the long term.
No.
That's why I agree with you guys 1,000%.
Yeah. But again, everything with the proper program,
Perfect.
I mean, we can do wonders, right? It's just, we got to take the time to listen, think about it, put a strategy, make sure it works, and then keep revisiting that. So that's huge. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you, Carl.
And plug into, what's the name of your practice again, too? Sorry,
Yeah,
for everybody
it's
who's
called
listening.
Becoming You Counselling and Psychotherapy Services. I'll send you a bunch of information for how people
Yep.
can find me if they want to find me, or just, you know, I guess email bomb me with hate. That's okay too. I can handle it. Right?
Yeah. I mean, we have, and again, we have you as one of our supporters on the website, too.
Oh,
so
perfect.
if they
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
check it out, it's on the T4TCS website as one of the supporters and collaborators. So, yeah, I think this was a great episode. Thanks again, and hopefully, actually, we'll have you back.
Absolutely.
For
I
sure.
think
I'd
that's
love to.
huge, right?
Yeah.
So
I'd love to. And you guys will see me probably show up at one of the dojo.
the dojo, yeah.
Hello. I'll sneak in one day. Hey,
Yeah,
you guys wanna-
anytime, man.
It's Carl, and not the Army Carl memes. It's going to be actual Carl, right?
All right,
Cheers, everybody.
guys. Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.